Hello, good afternoon, and I'd like to thank IPOPI for inviting me to speak today too. I'm Rosalind Fischer. I'm on the board of INGID, and I practice in Oxford at the John Radcliffe Hospital, which is now known as the Oxford University Hospitals Trust, Foundation Trust. And I'm going to talk to you today about the role of the specialist nurse in PID, and I'm going to make it very specific to my role, because Carla's just explained why we need specialised nurses in PID. Okay, so thank you. Right, so I'm actually going to discuss who are the specialist nurses in PID, where do we work, and where have we actually come from to be working in the specialty that we're in, what we do, and how do we actually deliver our care. So I wanted to just discuss how in the early days of caring for patients with PID, so I'm sort of rewinding now by about 30 years, there were no nursing experts in PID. In fact, PID was obviously a lot less understood then as it is now. And certainly for nurses, there were few learning resources available. There certainly weren't the groups that we have today, such as INGID, and in the UK we have the Immunology and Allergy Nurses group. It wasn't particularly taught well to nurses historically, certainly in the undergraduate level and in the schools of nursing in the UK. It was one of the subjects that was sort of brushed aside and left until the end of the training, and it wasn't particularly well taught. And so nurses in the UK certainly, and I think probably in other areas, came into the specialty from various different routes, often from infectious diseases, because that's where patients were nursed in isolation, and obviously patients with an immune deficiency also needed to be nursed in isolation sometimes. Allergy is another classic route into immunology and nursing. Hematology and rheumatology are two other common routes where nurses became competent at PID, caring for patients with PID. So I did a bit of local research and tried to find out how our own department, our clinical immunology department, recruited its first nurses. And I found this advert, which is advertising for a research nurse, part-time research nurse, to work with a Dr. Helen Chappell in a double-blind trial looking at patients on prophylactic antibiotics. And in fact, a lady called Veronica Brennan applied for this post and was successful in being appointed to the post. And she actually became one of the pioneers of immunology nursing in the UK, and actually was one of the founder members of INGID, which was set up 30 years ago as a international nursing group. So I work in the UK, and as most of you will know, I work for the NHS, which is a system which provides free medical care and is paid for through our taxes. And in the UK now, there are 30 plus, I think, I tried to count it up, and actually with the paediatric departments, but there's probably around 35 clinical immunology centres in the UK, which is where you'll find the majority of specialist nurses working. There are a few nurses who specialise in immunology, but they're working for pharma companies, and then obviously in the private sector there may well be some more. And in 2016 to 2017 in the UK, I got that from the immunoglobulin database. There were 3,927 primary immune deficiency patients were treated with immunoglobulin. And in my region, which Oxford is part of, 275 patients with PID were treated with 143,360 grams of immunoglobulin, so we're fairly prolific users. And this is a map. I need to apologise to Scotland and Ireland. There's a little dot in Wales down there, but this basically shows where the immunoglobulin is being used. And the immunoglobulin database in the UK was set up so that we can ensure our supply is maintained. So back to me. I came into my role as a specialist nurse practitioner in immunology, and I had quite a lot of varied experience. I was a ward sister for a number of years on a neurology and neurosurgical unit. I've also had experience in intensive care. I worked on a busy intensive care unit in London for many years. I had done some research with the blood transfusion service, and I had then latterly been a specialist nurse in infection control. I then had a break in my career to have my children. And my academic qualifications are, I have formal qualifications in neurosurgery and neurology nursing, intensive care nursing, and I have a diploma in infection control, and I also have a teaching and assessing qualification. So I wanted to have a look at the role of the specialist nurse in relation to what we do, and this piece of work was quite interesting. It was a study by the RCN in 2009, and it actually recorded the interventions of rheumatology specialist nurses who aren't dissimilar from immunology specialist nurses. And basically, I just wanted to show that our administration responsibilities are quite large, 21%, and I would say that's true for what I do as well. A lot of protocol writing, a lot of clinical guidelines, a lot of audit work. Education came out at 6% in this particular study. I'd say we spend a little bit more time educating ourselves and others. Research, 4%. That's probably true for the amount of time I spend doing research. We have recently been involved in a couple of projects. But as you can see, the major part of our work is clinical. So in our department at the Oxford University Hospitals Trust, we have 4 specialist nurse practitioners. 3 are part-time, and our lead nurse is full-time. We have 1 part-time staff nurse and 1 healthcare assistant. And together, these nurses equate to 3 full-time nurses. So 3 full-time equivalents. And we work in a department with 3 consultants, a clinical fellow, a specialist registrar, and we also were very lucky we have a hospital manager to help us run our home therapy program and basically the department. So from a clinical point of view, we have an infusion clinic, which is nurse-led, and in our clinic we treat 40 patients who are on intravenous immunoglobulin. They come to clinic to have their infusions, and 9 patients who are on subcutaneous immunoglobulin. They are mostly PID patients. We are getting increasing numbers of secondary immunodeficient patients, and we have a few neuro patients in that mix. And the major part of our work is our home therapy program, which we are recently, last year we celebrated 30 years of home therapy, and we have 33 patients who are at home infusing intravenous immunoglobulin and 163, but actually since I wrote this, it's now up, I think, at about 168 patients at home giving themselves subcutaneous immunoglobulin therapy. So the home therapy training program is a very large part of our role as specialist nurses. We train the patients. We have 5 or 6 one-to-one training sessions for each patient and their infusion partner. We have to teach them about everything, really, about immunoglobulin, how to give it, needle insertion, and actually, before everything, we need to assess that they are suitable to have this therapy at home and that they will be compliant. And we need to talk to them and really assess how is the best way for them to give themselves their immunoglobulin. Do they want to do, if they're doing SCIG, do they want to do push, rapid push? Do they want to do infuse via a pump? And we usually work out with them the best way for them to give themselves the treatment. We need to teach them about adverse reactions. We need to teach them about their disease and how they need so that they can recognize when maybe they're not having enough immunoglobulin or when they should and shouldn't infuse. And everything we teach them is to do with compliance. And then we need to give them constant support and encouragement whilst they're at home. We see them once a year to have a home therapy review, but that's all. We do a home visit, which is usually the 5th or the 6th training session that we give them, and we go to their home, which is very time consuming, but they seem to get a lot out of that, and so do we, because we can obviously find if there are any problems. We've had cats wandering across tables and dogs and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is just a slide to show you that if we didn't have home therapy in Oxford, we would actually need 27 nurses and 8 to 10 times more clinic space than we have. So it's hugely beneficial, home therapy, primarily for the patients, obviously, but for the department as well. And with our home therapy service, as I said earlier, we've actually got 3 whole-time nurses, and we're managing 200 plus home therapy patients with the home therapy training. Recently, we've been put through an accreditation process, and I'm pleased to say we gained accreditation. And this is a new wave accreditation from the Royal College of Physicians. And as part of that, we need to get a fair amount of patient feedback. And this is a poster, an audit that we carried out. And this is a poster that we've got up in our clinic now. There's the nurses across the middle. You may recognise some of us. And the gold stars are our positive feedback that we receive from the patients, and then the rain clouds are the negative feedback. But on the whole, I could read a couple. One of the gold stars: the empathy and good humour of the nursing staff is truly remarkable. The way the nurses treat all the staff and patients with equality and respect and kindness. So we were very, very pleased with this patient feedback, and actually it was commented on in the accreditation process, which was quite a long process. It required us to go through a fairly lengthy period of quality improvement and patient feedback, patient involvement, and then we had a rigorous assessment, and we came out of it. We came through it very well. There's a couple of negative ones here, but the only one, one wanted more Wi-Fi, which is difficult. One person said that they'd like a little bit more information, so we've obviously tried to act on that and tried to put them in touch with patient groups, and obviously educated them more ourselves. And then one person wanted a cold water dispenser. Well, that's quite difficult, so we haven't managed to do that, but we have started putting jugs of cold water in the fridge with ice, so hopefully they've got nice cold water. And then during our accreditation, and certainly in the phase where we were sort of assessing what we were doing and how well we were doing it, we did decide that we weren't doing quite enough for our transition patients, that is from paediatric services to adult services. And so we held a patient day that was specifically focused at our younger patients, although you can see from this photograph that there are all ages. But that was very successful. We got very, very good feedback from that, and the younger patients really benefited from it. And this is an educational aspect of that day when we basically updated all the patients in the latest research, and we had doctors on the panel as well as nurses, and actually that was a really successful venture for us. That's just another photograph of the patient day. So what of the future, and what are our challenges ahead? I think that certainly in Oxford we are going to come up against problems because of the survival into late adulthood, which is fantastic for everybody, but it certainly makes our home therapy program more difficult, and we need to recognise those challenges and also be very aware that as patients get elderly, they may not find it as easy to give themselves home therapy, and we may need to give them more support, find local units that can help them. So that's definitely a challenge. There are more patients all the time, so we need to make sure that we've got the resources to deal with them. In the UK at the moment, we do have quite a significant nursing shortage, and we're finding it very difficult to retain nurses, and that needs to be balanced with advances in the care, because with more than 300 genotypes now recognised all the time, there's new advances being made. And I think we need to have more nursing research. And I just found this quote, and I think it's quite poignant about our role. And it was written by Peter Vickers, Anne Gardolf and Amelia Warner in 2008. And it's, "The care of adults and children with immunodeficiencies is very much a multidisciplinary and multi-professional responsibility. Amongst many of the health and other professionals whose input can make all the difference to the quality of life of these patients, the nurse stands out as the one person who probably has the most contact with the patients and their families." Thank you.